Tell me that's not gorgeous. Too bad it's carbon. Hey everybody, thanks for being here. See my hat? Arrows 365. I got this hat about 10 years ago at an event, and it was on their merchandise table. And I just had to have it because my whole life, even then, was consumed with traditional archery and more specifically arrows. And I was really then getting my grasp on what arrows mean to traditional archery. You know, with a longbow and a recurve, we don't have much to tune with the bow. Actually, I will say that there's very little to tune with the bow, with the exception of maybe brace height. And or if you want to put a toothpick or a matchstick on the side of your strike plate or underneath it, there's ways to kind of mess with windage and elevation that way. But when it comes to tuning a traditional bow, we're really not doing that. We're tuning the arrow to that specific bow. Yes, you can use the same arrow on multiple bows. That is a thing. But for the most part, if they're lighter or heavier, you just need to change your point weight. And that's kind of the point of the pun. The point of this portion of the video is that I want to explain how the allure to me of traditional archery is that there's less to do, and it's all about this little guy right here. So, of course, with the wooden arrow, really all we and carbon or aluminum for that matter, all we can really do is change the spine and change the length of the arrow and the point weight. That's it. This is the dance, right? So that marriage between the bow and the arrow happens more here than it does at the bow. Again, if you wanted to mess with your brace height, you could get a little extra tuning out of that. But for the most part, all we have is the arrow. And you think about something like bare bow, which you know I compete at, the the level of tunability of those bows goes even above and beyond, of course, right? We have our tiller bolts. I can change my tiller to positive or negative. Brace height, of course, I have roughly an inch of variability there. We have plungers and rests. Some drop away, but most flip out of the way. So there's a lot you can do with a bow, with a bare bow. Even changing the grip position or height of the grip position can do some tuning changes as well. Now, even I will argue this and how important the arrow is to bare bow. If you think of the spine charts they have for aluminum, carbon, wood, even composite carbon and aluminum, like an X10, you will see that the spine chart range is massive. And that's good. That's a good thing because it helps us narrow down the most specific arrow that will work best for our particular setup. That's kind of a cool thing, especially if you think of wood. Wood is pretty much limitless in the variability in spine you can get. Aluminum probably next, and carbon comes last on that. So you'll probably see less of a selection in carbon than you will with aluminum or wood. And again, I'll simply say that this is what we tune to make our bow shoot well, not so much the bow itself. Now, that being said, I have over the years, because I've had so many longbows and recurves, wood, not so many ILFs, I've had so many that I've had to go through an enormous gamut of arrow sizes, weights, lengths, point weights, you name it. I've been through it. How bad is this problem? Well, take a look at this.
Here's the batch of the arrows I'm currently working on. Oh, and here's a batch of arrows I made this spring and summer for Julie. Oh, and over here on this table, there's more arrows I bought this summer. Dozens, as you can see, new and unwrapped. Oh, we'll go over here. Oh, here's more. These are ace and cedar and carbon and more arrows. Oh, and here's arrows right here as well. Oh, and there's some right here. Of course, you can see that. Oh yeah, and there's a bucket over here full of arrows. Yeah. Oh yeah, and there's a bucket here too. Yep. Oh, and up in the rafters, there's some arrows here too. Oh, and oh look here, there's arrows up here as well. Weird. Oh, and here's some tubes with arrows in them, and yeah, there's some random arrows right here. And I found arrows I hadn't found in a while. I was looking for those. Here they are. Oh, interesting. Oh, arrows here too. Look, here's some arrows. Yeah. Oh yeah, and here's all my barebow arrows. Here's some arrows here, feathers of course. Oh, and then here's carbon arrows. Oh yeah, here's some arrows and arrows and arrows.
Okay, so to say I have a problem with arrows is an understatement. I love arrows, and there's a reason for it. So when I grew up back in the 80s, when I started really seriously shooting, my mom had commissioned my cousin Andrew to make me a dozen arrows, and they were the one and only dozen arrows I had. They were not expensive at that time, but my parents did not have a lot of money. And the arrows were probably, I'm going to guess, $25 fletched. And those were Game Getter 2s, aluminum, 2018. And yes, I still have a couple. I know that's kind of silly, but so that being said, I shot those arrows and into an ethafoam target. If you remember what those were, I believe Stanley Hips made them back in the day. And the foam targets were about that big. And it was just one big piece of foam. And when I meant big, I meant that thick. And you'd shoot those out pretty quick. And where I grew up, I shot pretty much only 10 yards. And it was in our garden, and I had a brick wall there. And after a while, I'd shoot through the target, you'd shoot it out, and next thing you know, I'm hitting the brick wall. And so I'd bend some, and then that would be the end of it. And there were no more. So it was like that was the dozen I had. And so, like I said, my parents really couldn't afford to get me arrows back then. And so I just really took care of those arrows. And now to this day, I have arrows, lots of them. And even when I break them, some of those ones up in the rafters were broken, and I don't know, I just keep them. I don't do anything with them. I just keep them up there. But I do have a lot. So again, I loved the aluminum arrow going back into the 80s, and I still shoot aluminums. I like aluminum for indoor. I like aluminum for hunting. And what I like about aluminum, and I think I mentioned this before, and I know I mentioned it on some podcasts, is that it's got nothing to do with its straightness. It's got to do with the fact that this arrow it has the same spine throughout the entire circumference of the arrow. Whereas a carbon arrow is woven, it might have some stiff spots. You really don't find that with aluminum. If it says it's a 500 spine, it's 500. No matter how you rotate this arrow, it'll be 500 pretty much all the way around. You might have some slight deviations, but it's not going to be immense. So the other thing with aluminums, they do bend, of course. You hit a rock or you hit something hard, or you're not careful with pulling it out, or maybe another arrow hits it and they'll bend. So it does not hold true. Back in the day, we had arrow straighteners, but they really didn't do a good job. And then somewhere along the line, of course, the carbon arrow came about. I'm going to think that was in the 80s, probably the mid to late 80s. And the carbon arrow, there's a saying, it's either straight or it's broken. They really don't hold a bend. You can bend these things and they just still hold beautifully true. As you can see, no matter how hard you bend it, you're either going to break it or it's going to be straight. My peeve, or the thing I don't like about carbon arrows, again, is that they're not really true to spine all the way around their circumference. I've done a live video where I've demonstrated this. I've proven this. It might say 500, but it might be a 480. It might be a 500. It might be a 520. It just is never the same. And if you have the right tools, you can find that true spine and spine align it. But why go through the hassle when you can just take an aluminum and it's going to be the same spine all the way around? And then some people will argue, well, the straightness. I got to be honest, straightness to me is important, but it's a little on the overrated side, especially when you see like an arrow straightness of 0.003 versus a straightness of 0.006. You're kind of splitting hairs. This, I believe, is an 006. You can't see any wobble in this. This is insanely straight, and it does just fine. Now, the thing I'd worry about, is it really true to spine? That's the argument in my case. I'd rather have the consistent spine versus a consistent straightness. Now, here's the thing. What I believe is why most people are afraid of wood arrows, and I'll use that term afraid lightly, but the thing that kind of sucks about wood arrows is the wobble. They are not straight. Very rarely will I buy a dozen arrows and they're all straight. There's always going to be some that are fairly straight and then might need a little touching up. But then for the most part, you're going to have to do some straightening of the arrow shaft to make it to your satisfaction. Now, what is to your satisfaction? Everybody's different. Are you going to be able to get this? No, I highly doubt you're going to be able to get that. You can get close, but it's not going to be perfect. Now, again, with these, you saw me mess with these the other day in the part 1 video. These are hunter grade. The hunter grade will have lots of runoff, not lots, but some runoff. They're not going to have a consistent uniform grain all the way through the entire length of the shaft. Whereas when you buy a premium grade, it will. It'll be consistent and uniform end to end. Typically, when you have those, they do tend to be a little straighter and they're easier to straighten as you go on. With some of these hunter grade shafts, they have so much runoff. I don't know what you can see there, and see if I can get you to see something there. But they have so much runoff that when you're looking down that shaft, it might have like a dog leg in it. It might have an extreme kind of a kink in that wood at that spot. You never know where the kinks or the bends are going to be in these. So you need to either kind of look down them, which is difficult to do. I mean, you can see if the wood arrow has some bend in it. I can see it in this one. But there's other ways of finding out where this thing is straight and where it's got the bend in it. Now, what is your level of satisfaction is totally up to you. And again, these are the arrows that were originally in question that we're trying to make better. They are hunter grade. Because they're stained, you might be able to see the runoff in these. There's a significant amount of runoff in these. It's fine. Again, it's totally fine, but that's fairly straight. Julie shot these at tournament. I am okay with this amount of wobble in an arrow. It's not terrible. Could it be straighter? Sure. Is it a premium? No. Could I have spent more time with this arrow? Sure. And again, maybe they were straighter when I made them, but with us shooting them, her pulling them out of the target, some people aren't careful. They pull wood arrows out from the back. It will cause some bend if you do that. And then you have to just kind of work at it and again, get it to correct and get it straight. So how do we straighten them? Well, that's the next step. And we're actually going to go into the kitchen to do that. Why the kitchen? You'll see in a minute. Okay, everyone. I am here in my kitchen with my arrow making tools. Why am I in the kitchen? And I will tell you why. So I understand that a lot of people do not have an arrow spinner. This little device they make. You can find these, I think, even on Amazon or any archery retailer. This one, again, I had custom made for me a few years back by a machinist and a metal worker. It's perfectly plain, square, flat. But anyway, the reason I'm here is because of the countertop. The countertop, my countertop is made of quartz and it has been planed flat or milled, like I believe most countertops have been, especially if they're stone. So I know it's perfectly flat. When I run a straight edge on this, it is perfectly level, perfectly flat. And this is a great tool to use for straightening arrows. Now I'm going to do a little demonstration here. So I have my Easton arrows, right? So I have an aluminum XX75, right? And I'll put that, you can see the corner of my door here where I have the tip of the arrow right there. You can see that when I spin that, that spins pretty straight, right? And same with my legacy here. Same thing, just gonna spin it. You can see those are really perfectly straight. And then I grabbed two pretty bent, not bent, but they have some wobble in them. You can see that wood arrow definitely has some wobble in it. This one probably does too. Let's just double check. Yeah, it's got some good wobble in it. Now, the idea of the countertop, is going to push this aside. The idea of the countertop, again, it's a perfectly flat surface. And you can see that when I do this little demonstration with just the tiniest bit of pressure or push, that arrow spins very nicely. It just spins very nicely. And you can see that the aluminum does the same. See how that thing just rolls very nicely with very little effort. Now you can see with the wood arrows, get that out of the way, with these wood arrows, when I push it, you can see it wobble, number one, but it also stops. It stops because it's got bend in it. And what it's trying to do is just finding like where it makes like a curvature, it's actually stopping on that point where it's just not going to move unless I give it some real force, and it'll roll, of course. But you can see even when I roll it on this surface, if you watch the end here, you can see that it will lift a little, lift and turn down, lift and turn down. That's a good example right there. You can see that thing wobble on this surface. Now, in order to straighten wood arrows, you're going to need some fairly expensive equipment that you need to purchase. One of them that you can use is a screwdriver, or you can simply use a glass. I've seen some people do this demonstration with a beer bottle. A glass, a screwdriver. I like the screwdriver method. I've been using it a long time. Ace Archery Tackle also makes an arrow straightening device. I think it's a piece of, I think it's a steel or aluminum with a brass wheel on it. It's just a pulley wheel, and you would roll it on the shaft and compress one side. And it's a really neat tool, but you don't need it. I like to use the screwdriver. And the way you do this method is quite simple. So we'll find one of these arrows. This one's got a pretty good wobble in it. So what you do is at your countertop, when you gently roll this, you can see if you put it in certain positions, it wants to just find center. It'll just roll itself over just ever so slightly. But what you can do is you roll this and not put tension on it, or you can put little tension on it through the middle, and you will see that one of those ends pops up. Now it's just, I'm not pushing hard on this. Even if I was, doesn't matter. It's running across that flat surface. You can see that this end is up. And as I continue to roll it, it gets worse. And then all of a sudden it gets better, which tells me that downside is where it's highest. See that? And as I roll it, now it's stopped, right? So what that's telling me is the underside, when it's up high, is the high side. So if I flip it over to where it stops again, so there's, I could see it. I can see that gap of light underneath the arrow. That's just one method. Another method is completely opposite, where I roll it to the point where that's going to be the lowest end. And when I hold that down and tap it, screwdriver out of the way, you hear that, how it makes noise. And then as I roll it, it goes away. So the high side right there is what I need to compress. And we call this process, I believe it's called burnishing. We're just compressing this side to help straighten it out on the other side. And what I do, I take the screwdriver, and I'm just going to hold this here and just run the length. And you can see I put a little bit of a bend in that as I do it, because I'm compressing that side. And the idea is to take that warp out. You can see I still hear it. So that's the low side. And there's the high side right there. And I'll take that. And again, just kind of do some compression. Now, another thing you're going to have to do is, and this is helpful, you're going to want to look down the arrow. This is not necessarily a good way to create a bend in the, or fix a bend in the arrow by looking down. It does kind of work, but it takes a well-trained eye. You have to be able to see exactly where the bend is. You can look down an arrow and see that it's bent, but you really can't quite tell where exactly that bend is. So that's why I kind of like this method right here. If I take this, and again, if I look at it even plain this way, I can see that on this end, there's light coming through that area right through here. You probably can't see that on camera, but I can see it. And then I would see it flat through here, clear up to about here, and clear to here, which tells me this is the high side of this arrow right here. So I'm just going to take it, and again, I'm going to work that down just a bit, compressing the high side and trying to flatten it out. And as I roll it ever so slight, I can see that that's still a little high, right about there. And again, I'm just going to work it. This takes time. This doesn't just happen super fast. It takes some time to go through this process and find out where that is. You can see it wobbling as I go through it. Right there, you can see it's high, which means the underside is needing compression. See how it drops as I go through? Drop, up, and or I can see light. And now again, if I see a good portion of this is up and it's flat through here, that tells me this underside needs compression. So I'll take it and flip it over, and I'll go through this process, just trying to work it so that it's eventually has a good spin and it doesn't wobble so much like we talked about downstairs. There's going to be a place where it's you're happy enough with what you're getting out of that arrow. So again, I'm just going to keep working it. And you do have to work all ends of the arrow. You can't just work one side unless you can see where that bend is. And again, looking under, find the light. Some there. I'm sure other people have other methods of doing this. This is just what I've done over the years. And it just takes a little time. And again, having this is kind of key too, because I can see where the real wobble is with this guy. I'm trying to show you this for people that don't have an arrow spinner. Some high side right here. It's coming. Here we go. A little high there. Okay. So what you see, this took a few minutes of just going back and forth and flipping this thing over to get it straight. But I'm pretty happy with what I have now. Again, it's not perfect, but it's pretty dang close. So if I take my arrow spinner and let's find a spot on the wall in the background. There's that corner of my door. You can see that that is not nearly as wobbly as it was last time. It's not, again, it's not a carbon arrow, right? Perfect spinning, perfectly straight. It's wood. It's a natural product. And that's not bad. What you see right there. I'm happy with that. Especially, like I said, for this test batch. For taking a premium would finish up a lot faster, a lot easier. And then what this does, like I said, by doing that compression and getting that one side compressed relaxes the other side, or kind of pulls up in the opposite direction, it kind of creates flat spots. And those will get corrected, like when I put on a clear coat and then do a little scuff or a sand, and I'll probably do 2 clear coats with these particular arrows. And then those flat spots will kind of diminish. And they're not extremely flat. You can hear the flat spots as I roll that on the rollers. It's not so smooth like the perfectly round aluminum or carbon. Hear how nice that is? And then you can hear this has some flat spot. So, and that's not going to affect anything really. Again, once these are all done, we're going to put them back on the spine tester and see if that sometimes compression takes away or adds a little spine to the arrow. But we'll test that, of course. And that's it. That's how you do this straightening. And again, you can use a glass. I have a glass here again I showed. Same concept, right? You find those spots where you can see there's high spots. And like I said, if you tap it, hear that? And then as I roll it, it'll flatten. It's gonna be loud there. I can see it going up, but it gets lower. And then that's how I know where that bend is. And if you look, it's going to be hard for you guys to see. I can see light underneath that arrow right there. And then all I would do is take a glass, same concept. Just compress it a little. And that's how you find that. There's a high spot there. Compress it. And that's all it takes, guys. It just takes a little time and a little effort. And like I said, maybe each arrow takes a few minutes, and it's worth the time to put in to straighten these to make them just right. And it's not that hard. It just takes time. And that's it. That's it for this portion of the video. Next one I'll do, we're going to cut, we're going to taper. I'm not going to tail taper. I'm not going to barrel taper. We're just talking about tapering the point and knock ends. I'll probably use a top hat point with these arrows, which means I won't taper this end. I will keep them flat. And then that has a screw in portion, which is kind of nice. That's what top hat does. So I'll use the top hat, but I will do the knock end taper, and I'll use the wood chuck, and I'll show you how I do that. We'll do a stain, and then we'll do a seal, and then fletch, and then that's pretty much it. And then we'll test them, of course. Julie will shoot them, and we'll see how they work out. And hopefully it works out fine. It might not. That's okay. We have more. We're going to keep doing this until it's perfect. And yeah, and that's it. So anyway, I hope this part was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, of course, leave them. And of course, make it look good. Talk to you soon. Peace.